I thought nothing could shake me, not the storms offshore, not 14-hour shifts on a rig in the Gulf, but standing in the delivery room at Memorial Herman Katy Hospital, I felt my knees nearly buckle. The doctor said both mother and baby were healthy. Relief washed over me until the nurse placed that child in my arms. One look, and my world cracked wide open. She didn't look like me, not even close. My wife, Ashley Bennett, wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm 36, a drilling engineer from Katy, Texas. I've built steel platforms that withstand hurricanes. I thought I'd built a marriage just as strong. But in that cold, bright room, staring down at a newborn who carried none of my blood, I realized I was the only man in the room without answers. And if the truth could shatter me here, in front of my wife, my mother-in-law, and God himself, what else was waiting in the shadows? Most mornings in Katy, Texas started the same for me. The alarm rang before sunrise, and I was on my feet by 5. A pot of strong black coffee brewing in the kitchen, the smell cutting through the quiet house. I liked those first minutes of silence, steam rising from my mug while the neighborhood was still dark. Then the day began, checking emails from the office in Houston's energy corridor, scanning safety reports, reviewing schedules for the offshore crew. By 7, I was in steel-toed boots, driving toward the city, the freeway humming with trucks and tankers. Being a drilling engineer isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. I'd walk the yard, run my hands along the equipment, feel the grit of metal and oil. I was proud of that. Out there, nothing is left to chance. Structures stand or they collapse. And I believed, maybe foolishly, that marriage worked the same way. Build it strong enough, and it should last forever. I first saw Ashley Bennett on a Saturday morning at the South Katy Community Center. The place had seen better days: peeling paint, warped floors, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the walls. I was there with a couple of buddies, rolling fresh white paint over dingy panels, when the door creaked open. She stepped in carrying a box of cleaning supplies that looked heavier than she was. Dark blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, sweatshirt flecked with old paint stains. She gave the room a quick scan, then smiled, one of those unguarded, easy smiles that makes a stranger feel familiar. We started talking about which finish would last longer on high-traffic walls. Trivial stuff. But it didn't feel trivial in that moment. The words came easily, as if we'd skipped the awkward small talk and gone straight to knowing each other. I didn't realize it then, but that simple exchange would change the course of my entire life. A few weeks later, I worked up the nerve to ask Ashley out. She said yes without hesitation, and we met at a small Italian place tucked between a florist and a bookstore in downtown Houston. The kind of restaurant where the lighting is low, the tables close, and the smell of fresh basil hangs in the air. From the start, it felt easy. No searching for clever lines, no forced laughter. Her smile carried the same warmth I'd seen at the community center. Unguarded, genuine, the kind that makes you want to hear it again. When she leaned forward across the table, listening like every word I said mattered, I felt a closeness that usually takes years to build. We traded stories about childhood, family, dreams too big to say out loud, and by the time we stepped out into the Houston night, I knew this wasn't just another date. It felt like the beginning of something permanent. That night at the little Italian place stretched longer than either of us expected. The waiter refilled our glasses twice, but we barely noticed. Ashley told me about growing up in Round Rock, chasing fireflies with her cousins, and how her father used to fix up old cars in their driveway. She laughed when she admitted she once tried to drive one at 12 years old, only to roll it halfway down the street before stalling out. I shared my own stories, long Texas summers climbing oak trees in Katy, sketching oil rigs and bridges in the margins of my school notebooks, promising myself I'd build something real one day. She listened closely, leaning in across the candlelight, like every detail mattered. By the time the plates were cleared, it didn't feel like we were strangers swapping small talk. It felt like we were old friends rediscovering each other. And in that easy closeness, I knew I wanted a second date before the first had even ended. As weeks turned into months, Ashley and I slipped into a rhythm that felt natural. We celebrated the little victories, her landing a big account at the firm, me finishing a tough project offshore ahead of schedule. I admired her drive, the way she poured herself into every task, sometimes staying up late just to finish a volunteer project for the community. She admired my steadiness, my insistence on doing things the right way, even when no one was watching. Of course, it wasn't all perfect. She had a habit of overcommitting, stretching herself too thin, while I could be stubborn to the point of frustration, digging in on things as small as how to load the dishwasher. But instead of pulling us apart, those differences gave us practice, learning to compromise, to laugh at our flaws, to forgive quickly. The more we saw of each other, the good and the bad, the more convinced I became. This was a woman I could build a life with. When it came time to propose, I didn't want fireworks or a crowded restaurant. That wasn't us. One Saturday evening, after a long week, Ashley and I cooked dinner together at her apartment. We ate on the back porch, the smell of grilled chicken still hanging in the warm Texas air. The sun was sliding down over Katie, streaking the sky with gold and pink. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. No fanfare, no speech rehearsed 100 times. Just me, steady hands but a shaky voice, telling her how much she'd changed my life, how I couldn't picture a future without her in it. When I opened the box, the ring wasn't extravagant, just a simple gold band with a single diamond, chosen because it reminded me of her. Understated, but beautiful. Her eyes filled with tears, and before I could even finish asking, she whispered yes. We were married on a warm spring afternoon in the backyard of Ashley's parents' home in Katy. Their garden was in full bloom, roses climbing the fence, magnolias heavy with blossoms, the air thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass. A simple white arch wrapped in ivy stood at the center of the lawn. We didn't invite hundreds, just family, close friends, the people who mattered. I stood in my suit, heart pounding as Ashley walked toward me in a lace dress that caught the sunlight. Her smile was wide, unguarded, the same smile I'd fallen for at the community center. The ceremony was short but full of weight. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promises of patience, honesty, and building a life sturdy enough to weather storms. When the pastor said, "You may kiss the bride," the sound of laughter and applause filled the yard. Barefoot under string lights, drinking Texas craft beer, we danced into the night, believing we'd laid the foundation for forever. A few months after the wedding, we found our first house, a small 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood of Katy, just a short walk from a park lined with tall oak trees. It wasn't perfect. The carpet was worn, the kitchen outdated, and the roof groaned when the wind picked up. But the moment we stepped inside, it felt like it could be ours. Weekends turned into projects. I sanded old cabinets while Ashley picked paint colors, her hair pulled back and streaked with flecks of yellow. She insisted on a bright front door to make the place feel welcoming. I built shelves from reclaimed wood I'd saved from a rig job. We argued playfully over which couch to buy, then laughed about it as we ate takeout on the floor. Little by little, the house stopped being just walls and shingles. Every nail we hammered, every picture we hung wove our lives tighter together. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was home. Life settled into a rhythm that felt steady and right. Every morning I brewed a pot of strong black coffee while Ashley made toast or scrambled eggs. We'd sit together at the small kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the curtains, talking about the day ahead before heading to work. Friday nights became sacred. Our ritual of pizza from the little shop down the street, curled up on the couch under a blanket, arguing over which movie to watch until we both gave in to something light enough to end the week with a laugh. Sundays were for family. Some weeks we drove out to Barbara Bennett's place where Ashley's mom set out a feast big enough to feed the whole neighborhood. Other weekends, my parents, Margaret and Robert Walker, came down from San Antonio bringing casseroles and stories from home. Those afternoons were filled with laughter, clinking dishes, and the comfort of being surrounded by people who loved us. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like forever. 2 years into our marriage, the conversation that had always lingered in the background finally came to the table. We were sitting down to dinner one evening, simple pasta, a bottle of red, and Ashley put her fork down and said, almost casually, "I think I'm ready to start a family." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd always wanted to be a dad, but I also knew it wasn't something to rush into. We talked for weeks, running the numbers like we were planning another offshore project. Could we handle daycare, college savings? Would the guest room become a nursery, or would we need a bigger house down the line? I pulled out spreadsheets. She pulled out baby name lists. Somewhere between the numbers and the daydreams, the decision took shape. For the first time, it didn't feel like someday. It felt like now. and as scary as it was, I was ready to dive into the next chapter with her. Once the idea of children stopped being a dream and started to feel real, Ashley and I treated it like we treated everything else, carefully, deliberately. We sat at the kitchen table late into the night with notebooks, calculators, and cups of coffee gone cold. We talked through every detail, how much to set aside from each paycheck, what we could cut from the budget, which expenses we could live without. Vacations could wait. The extra car we'd been eyeing, off the list. A new savings account marked college fund became our quiet promise to a future child we hadn't met yet. We even mapped out schedules. How would we handle night feedings? What would daycare cost if both of us kept working full-time? Each answer made the picture sharper, more real. By the time we closed the notebooks, we weren't just talking anymore. We had a plan. And for the first time, I felt like fatherhood wasn't just a hope, it was on the horizon. A few months after we agreed to start trying, I came home from a long day in the Houston energy corridor, the smell of oil and dust still clinging to my clothes. Ashley was waiting in the kitchen, her hands tucked behind her back, a nervous smile on her face. "Close your eyes," she said. I laughed, thinking she'd cooked something special, but I did as she asked. When I opened them, she was holding a small white box tied with a yellow ribbon. Inside was a pair of knitted baby shoes, no bigger than my palm. For a moment I just stared, my mind catching up. "You're pregnant?" I whispered. She nodded, tears already filling her eyes. I wrapped her in my arms, laughter and disbelief spilling out of me all at once. That night we sat on the couch with those tiny shoes between us, talking names, imagining the life that was about to begin. The future had never felt so close. Almost as soon as the news settled in, that little spare bedroom at the end of the hall took on new meaning. We spent a Saturday morning clearing out the old boxes, rolling up the worn rug and covering the floor with plastic sheets. Ashley insisted on yellow walls, something warm and bright, she said, a color that feels like sunlight. I rolled the paint while she carefully trimmed the edges, both of us speckled with drops by the time we finished. We laughed at the streaks on our clothes, imagining our child someday scribbling on those same walls. Piece by piece, the room transformed. A white wooden crib arrived in flat boxes, and I spent an evening wrestling with the instructions while she read them out loud, teasing me when I put the side rail on backwards. A mobile with clouds and stars hung above, a soft moon-shaped rug stretched across the floor. That room wasn't just painted yellow. It glowed with promise. Every Wednesday evening, Ashley and I drove to Memorial Herman Katy Hospital for prenatal class. The bright room was lined with bassinets, exercise balls, and diagrams of the human body that suddenly felt way too real. We joined a circle of other expectant parents, all of us nervous, all of us pretending to know more than we did. The instructor handed out dolls for swaddling practice. I watched her fold the blanket with expert precision, tucking in each corner like she'd done it for years. Mine looked more like a burrito gone wrong. Ashley laughed so hard she nearly dropped hers, and even the instructor cracked a smile. Still, I took notes like I was back in school, breathing techniques, signs of labor, feeding schedules. At night, our coffee table was stacked with parenting books, pages dog-eared and highlighted. Every fact, every diagram, every clumsy attempt at swaddling felt like another brick in the foundation. We weren't just expecting a baby. We were preparing for a whole new life. As the months passed, the pregnancy became more than doctor's notes and baby books. It became real. On quiet Saturday mornings, Ashley would call me into the bedroom, her hand resting on her belly. "Feel this," she'd whisper. I'd press my palm against the curve of her stomach and wait. Then, kick. A tiny, jolting reminder that our future was already here, alive and growing. Every time it tightened my throat and made me smile like a fool. In the evenings, we took slow walks through the neighborhood. The Texas air was warm, cicadas humming in the trees, streetlights flickering on one by one. Ashley moved slower as the weeks passed, pausing sometimes to catch her breath. I teased her gently, saying she was training for the big day. She'd swat my arm, laughing, her eyes glowing in the dim light. Those walks felt sacred, just the two of us, planning names, imagining tiny hands in ours, dreaming of a life that seemed close enough to touch. Every ultrasound felt like opening a gift. The room was dim, the screen glowing blue as the technician slid the probe across Ashley's stomach. And then it came, the rapid, steady rhythm of a heartbeat faster than I thought possible. Every time my chest tightened and my eyes stung. I'd grip her hand, both of us staring at the grainy image of a child we hadn't met but already loved. We started a ritual after each appointment, taking a photo of her in the nursery, standing against the yellow wall so we could track the changes. Month by month, the bump grew, and so did our anticipation. We pinned the prints to a corkboard in the hallway, a timeline of love and expectation. At night, I'd rest my hand on her belly and whisper to the baby, promising I'd be there, always. In those moments, nothing else mattered. The world shrank down to a heartbeat, a belly, and a future we thought was unshakable. About a month before the due date, our families threw us a baby shower at Barbara Bennett's backyard in Katy. The trees were strung with pastel bunting, the tables covered with little centerpieces made of baby bottles filled with candy. There was a cake shaped like a yellow duck, piles of wrapped gifts, and the sound of laughter drifting into the warm Texas afternoon. Ashley moved from guest to guest, one hand resting on her belly, her face glowing as she unwrapped tiny onesies, blankets, and toys. My mom, Margaret Walker, hugged me tight, whispering how proud she was. For a few hours, everything felt perfectly safe, like the world had narrowed to family, friends, and the promise of new life. Standing there surrounded by people we loved, I thought about how lucky this child would be. So many arms ready to hold her, so many hearts eager to protect her. In that moment, I believed nothing could shake the foundation we'd built. In the weeks after the shower, something in Ashley shifted. She seemed more tender, more present than ever. She'd slip notes into my lunch bag, "You're going to be an amazing dad," and pack an extra snack, just in case I had a long shift at the yard. Some evenings I'd come home to candles already lit, dinner waiting on the table, soft music drifting through the kitchen. She reached for my hand more often, resting her head on my shoulder during movie nights, or leaning against me when we walked through the neighborhood. At work, I'd catch myself smiling, thinking about how lucky I was to come home to her. Our love felt richer, like we were savoring every quiet moment before the chaos of parenthood began. I told myself this was the calm before the storm, the kind of memory couples look back on years later. At the time, I thought it was simply love at its strongest. I didn't realize it might have been something else entirely. As winter melted into spring, our life moved forward in a rhythm that felt almost cinematic. Evenings slowed into something gentle, just the two of us curled up on the couch, her belly a steady reminder of the life we were about to meet. The TV hummed in the background, but more often than not, we turned the volume down and just talked. We imagined the sleepless nights ahead, joked about who would be better at diaper duty, and argued playfully over which stroller was worth the money. Sometimes we'd sit in the nursery doorway, staring at the yellow walls and the white crib, whispering names back and forth like secrets too precious to share with anyone else. On those nights, I felt certain we were building something indestructible, a marriage strong enough to handle whatever came next, a family ready to write a lifetime of memories together. I thought we were standing on solid ground. I didn't know how fragile it really was. It started small, almost easy to dismiss. Ashley began coming home later than usual, saying she had to wrap up projects before maternity leave. At first, I didn't think much of it. She'd always been committed to her job at the marketing firm, and with deadlines piling up, staying late sounded reasonable. But the pattern grew. Some nights she walked in well past dinner, the faint smell of takeout clinging to her clothes. She'd brush it off. Grabbed a bite with a coworker, didn't want to trouble you. I wanted to believe her. I told myself this was just a busy season, nothing more. Still, there was something in her tone, the way she avoided eye contact when she explained, or how her smile seemed rehearsed. I caught myself replaying her words in my head long after she'd gone to bed. The explanations fit on paper, but deep down, a quiet unease began to take root. Something in our rhythm was slipping. One evening, while tidying up the kitchen, I noticed a folded slip of paper left on the counter. At first glance, it looked like any receipt, until I read the header, a high-end bistro in downtown Houston, the kind of place we usually saved for anniversaries. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and dessert. The date at the top stopped me cold. It was the same night Ashley had told me she was stuck late at the office. When she walked into the room, I held it up casually. "Did you go out to dinner?" Without missing a beat, she smiled and said it was just a small work victory with a coworker. Nothing special. I forced a nod, set the receipt back on the counter, and told myself not to overthink it. But the explanation didn't sit right. Ashley was careful with money, especially now. Splurging without a word felt out of character. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cracks were widening. Not long after the dinner receipt, other things started showing up. A designer handbag appeared in our closet, one I knew cost more than we'd ever spent on a single item. Then came a pair of sleek high-end shoes, still in their box, tucked behind the laundry hamper like she didn't want them seen. We were supposed to be saving every extra dollar. Hospital bills, diapers, formula, the endless expenses of a new baby. Every conversation had been about tightening our belts. Ashley had been just as disciplined as me, or so I thought. When I asked, she brushed it off. The bag was on sale, she said, too good to pass up. The shoes? A gift from a friend. Maybe it was true. Maybe I was just overthinking, clinging too tightly to our budget. But each explanation felt thinner than the last. It wasn't the price tags that unsettled me. It was the secrecy. Every hidden purchase was another shadow creeping into a life I thought I knew. It wasn't just the money or the late nights. It was the space growing between us. Ashley stopped reaching for my hand on our evening walks. Our goodnight kisses turned quick, distracted, sometimes skipped altogether. Even our sacred Friday movie nights, the tradition that had carried us through 2 years of marriage, began to feel hollow. We'd order the same pizza, curl up under the same blanket, but her attention was somewhere else. She'd sit with her phone in hand, scrolling through messages she never shared, a faint smile tugging at her lips that wasn't for me. When I asked what was so funny, she'd shrug and set the phone face down. I told myself it was hormones, stress, the exhaustion of pregnancy. But deep down, I felt it, the quiet gap widening between us. No fight, no harsh words, just an absence. An emptiness where closeness used to live. And every attempt I made to bridge it seemed to push her further away. The distance only grew sharper in the little things. Ashley used to light up when I came through the door. Now she barely looked up, her eyes fixed on the glow of her phone. Dinner conversations grew shorter, her answers clipped, her laughter saved for whatever, or whoever, was on that screen. Some nights I'd sit across from her at the table, watching her thumbs fly across the keyboard, waiting for her to notice me. She rarely did. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd shrug. Just work stuff. If I pressed, she'd roll her eyes, mutter that I was being paranoid, and go back to typing. The phone was never out of reach. On the couch, in the kitchen, even in bed, it stayed close to her hand like a lifeline. I told myself it was stress, distraction, maybe nesting nerves. But the truth lingered, unspoken. I wasn't the one she wanted to connect with anymore. One chilly Tuesday evening, Ashley came home late again. As I hung her coat in the hallway closet, something heavy shifted in the pocket. Curious, I reached in and pulled out a plastic hotel key card. Not a roadside inn, but a luxury place downtown, the kind with valet parking and marble lobbies. I turned it over in my hand, the hotel's logo stamped in gold. The sleeve it came in carried a date from just a week earlier, a night she'd told me she was working late. My chest tightened. For a moment, I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it belonged to a coworker. Maybe she'd been planning some kind of surprise. But deep down, I already knew. I slid the card back where I'd found it before she noticed, my heart pounding so loud it felt like the house itself could hear. I didn't confront her that night. I just carried the weight of that key like a stone in my pocket. A few nights later, while Ashley showered, I sat down at my desk and logged into our joint bank account. My palms were clammy as I scrolled through the transactions, scanning line after line. Then I saw them. Charges to the same downtown hotel, the one stamped on the key card. Not once, not twice. Several times, spread across months. Different amounts, different dates, but always the same place. The most recent charge lined up exactly with the night I'd found the card in her coat. My stomach dropped, the numbers blurring on the screen. This wasn't a one-off mistake or a bad coincidence. It was a pattern, planned, repeated. When Ashley stepped out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, she smiled faintly and asked if I was ready for dinner. I forced a nod, quickly closing the laptop. She didn't notice the tremor in my hands. But in that moment, I knew our marriage wasn't cracking. It was collapsing. The next evening, while we cleared plates after dinner, I decided I couldn't hold it in any longer. I kept my voice steady, casual even, though my heart was pounding. I noticed a few charges on our bank account, I said, setting a dish in the sink. The Grand Summit Hotel, downtown. Want to tell me about that? For a split second, Ashley's hand froze on the silverware. Then she turned back to the sink, rinsing like nothing was wrong. Sometimes after late nights at the office, I'm too exhausted to drive all the way home, she said smoothly. It's safer to just stay nearby. Her tone was even, her explanation neat and practiced. But it didn't match the woman I knew. Ashley had never been careless with money, never indulged in something as extravagant as a downtown hotel room. And if she'd been too tired, why hadn't she called me? I would have come in a heartbeat. Her story sounded paper thin, and I realized I wasn't looking for reassurance anymore. I was collecting evidence. Not long after her hotel excuse, I started noticing brown boxes stacked by the front door when I came home from work. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone shops online, but Ashley rushed to grab them before I could, slipping them into the bedroom or trunk of her car. If I asked, she waved me off. Client gifts, just work stuff. You wouldn't be interested. When I did catch glimpses, it was always something new. Dresses, blouses, shoes, pieces that didn't look like her usual style. Along with them came little changes. She started wearing more makeup, even on days she worked from home. Her hair, once tied back in a simple ponytail, was now curled or styled almost every morning. At first, I told myself she just wanted to feel confident during pregnancy. But the timing didn't fit. The late nights, the hotel charges, the secret packages, all of it pointed to a life she was building outside of ours. One Saturday morning, I got a call from a coworker who lived downtown. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. He said he'd just passed a cafe on Montrose and spotted Ashley sitting outside with a man he didn't recognize. They weren't talking like strangers. They were leaning in close, laughing, heads tilted toward each other the way couples do when the world fades around them. He made it clear he wasn't trying to stir trouble. "I just thought it was odd you weren't there," he said quietly. My stomach turned to stone. That afternoon, Ashley came home with shopping bags in her arms. I asked casually if she'd had breakfast. "Yeah, just toast and coffee here," she replied smoothly, unpacking throw pillows as if nothing had happened. Her voice was light, practiced. But in my head, I saw her at that cafe, laughing with a stranger, lying to my face without hesitation. That was the moment doubt hardened into dread. A few days after the cafe call, Ashley told me she'd be working late again. Same excuse, same steady tone. I nodded, pretending to accept it. But inside, I'd already decided. I needed to see for myself. 15 minutes after she left, I grabbed my keys and slipped into my truck. I kept several cars back, headlights dimmed, heart pounding like I was doing something criminal. It felt wrong, tailing my own wife, but the thought of not knowing was worse. She didn't head toward the office. She merged onto I-10 and drove straight into downtown Houston. Every mile sank me deeper into the truth I already feared. Finally, she pulled into the glowing drive of a luxury hotel, valet attendants rushing to open doors. She stepped out, not in work clothes, but a fitted dress I'd never seen. I parked a block away, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Whatever I found inside, I knew there was no turning back. I slipped into the hotel lobby a few minutes after Ashley, keeping my head low, my pace measured. The place reeked of polished wood and fresh flowers, every surface gleaming under golden light. I tucked myself behind a marble pillar near the lounge entrance. Then I saw her. Ashley stood just inside, scanning the crowd. A moment later, a tall, well-dressed man approached. I didn't recognize him, but the way her face lit up told me everything. She touched his arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He leaned closer, said something that made her laugh, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. They moved toward a corner table, his hand brushing hers, her body leaning in like it belonged there. My chest tightened. This wasn't business. It wasn't exhaustion or late nights at the office. It was betrayal, right in front of me, undeniable and alive under the glow of that chandelier. From my spot behind the marble pillar, I couldn't look away. Ashley leaned across the small table, her elbows on the polished wood, eyes locked on the man across from her. He said something I couldn't hear over the low hum of the piano in the lounge, and she laughed. Unguarded, genuine, the very laugh I'd once lived for. Then his hand slid across the table and rested lightly on her knee. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her hand over his, fingers curling in quiet familiarity. That tiny gesture cut deeper than any shouted confession ever could. I felt the blood drain from my face, my chest hollowing as if the air itself had turned heavy. Around us, the lobby buzzed with tourists, businessmen, bellhops rushing by. But in that corner, time slowed. Every touch, every smile, every soft glance was a nail in the coffin of the life I thought we were building together. I didn't follow them upstairs. I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, my chest hollow. I turned and walked out of the hotel, past the doorman who gave me a polite nod I barely registered. The cool night air hit me like a slap, sharp enough to remind me I was still breathing. I made it to my truck and sat there for a long minute, staring at the steering wheel, hands trembling. Then I started the engine and drove. No radio, no headlights cutting music through the silence, just the hum of tires on concrete and the echo of my own heartbeat. The city lights blurred as I passed them, each red light dragging out the pain, forcing me to sit still with images I couldn't erase. Her laugh, her hand on his, the doors closing between us. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same as always. But to me, it already felt like a graveyard. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the news like I usually did. Instead, I pulled my old suitcase from the closet and began packing in silence. A few shirts, jeans, work boots, the essentials. Each zipper sounded louder than it should have, echoing through a house that suddenly felt foreign. When I was done, I set the suitcase beside my chair in the living room. Then I sat down and waited. The blinds leaked narrow stripes of morning light across the floor, dust drifting in the air like it was holding its breath with me. Hours passed. I didn't move. My pulse was steady, my chest tight, bracing for impact. Around 9, I heard tires crunching in the driveway. The front door opened, and Ashley stepped in, wearing the same navy dress from the night before. She froze when she saw me, suitcase at my side. I didn't speak. I just waited. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Ashley stood frozen in the entryway, keys dangling from her hand, still wearing the fitted navy dress I'd seen under the hotel's chandeliers. Her eyes darted to the suitcase beside me, then back to my face. She forced a smile. "You're up early," she said lightly, slipping off her heels, moving toward the kitchen as if nothing was wrong. Her voice was calm, practiced, the same tone she used when explaining away late nights and mystery receipts. I didn't answer. I just watched her, the silence between us stretching until it bent the air. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, even. "I thought you were working late." Her hand tightened on the counter, but she kept her back turned. "I was," she replied, steady on the surface. "Don't," I said, sharper this time. That single word stopped her mid-step. For the first time, she looked unsure. I stood slowly, gripping the suitcase handle, and faced her. My voice was calm, too calm, each word dropping heavy between us. "I followed you last night," I began. "I saw you walk into the Grand Summit. I saw you meet him in the lobby. I saw you laughing, holding his hand, riding that elevator together." Her face went pale, but I didn't stop. "Before that, I found the hotel keycard in your coat. I checked our bank statements, charges to the same place, month after month. Then the dinner receipts for two, the new clothes, the lies about being too tired to drive home." By the time I finished, she was gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. The silence that followed was deafening. She knew I wasn't guessing. I wasn't paranoid. I was laying out the collapse of our marriage in hard, undeniable facts, and there was nothing left for her to hide behind. For a moment, she just stared at me, chest rising and falling, eyes flashing with something between panic and rage. Then the words came, sharp and fast. "So now you're spying on me?" she snapped. "Following me around like some jealous teenager? Going through our bank accounts, digging through my things. Do you have any idea how controlling that sounds, Ryan? Her voice rose with each sentence, hands cutting the air, anger filling the space where truth should have been. You think you're so perfect. Mr. Offshore Engineer, Mr. Always Right. You don't trust me, you don't respect me, and now you're trying to catch me in some trap? I let her tirade hang in the air, her accusations bouncing off walls that still smelled of baby powder and fresh paint. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout back. I just looked at her, steady and silent, knowing the truth was already out, and she was scrambling to bury it. Her voice cracked mid-accusation, the fire in her eyes dimming all at once. She stopped pacing, her arms dropped to her sides, and the kitchen went still except for the hum of the refrigerator. For the first time in months, she couldn't look me in the eye. The silence stretched so long I could hear my own pulse, then almost a whisper, "It's true." I felt the words like a blade to the chest. Her shoulders slumped, and her face crumpled in a way anger couldn't disguise. "I've been seeing someone," she said, barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ryan. I don't even know how it happened." The excuses spilled out. Late nights, needing someone to talk to, feeling lonely, but I barely heard them. The only thing that mattered was the sentence she couldn't take back. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "I cheated." And in that moment, the world I thought I knew finally collapsed. Her confession hung in the air, heavy and final, but one question clawed its way up from my chest. My throat tightened as I forced the words out. "Ashley, is the baby mine?" The room froze. She stopped crying, her lips parted, but no sound came. Seconds dragged into an eternity. I watched her eyes dart to the floor, then to the wall, anywhere but me. That silence told me more than words ever could. Finally, she shook her head, barely, as if admitting it even to herself was unbearable. I don't know," she whispered, voice cracking. My stomach dropped. Every memory, the ultrasounds, the baby kicks, the nights we painted the nursery, turned to ash in an instant. I'd prepared myself for betrayal, but not for this. Not for the possibility that the child I'd been dreaming of holding might never even be mine. The silence that followed didn't just fill the room, it crushed the air out of it. Her silence stretched until it was unbearable. Then, with a trembling breath, Ashley finally spoke. "Ryan, I'm not sure." 3 words, simple, quiet, but they detonated inside me. My ears rang, my vision blurred, the room shrinking around us. Everything we had built, every plan, every promise, every dream painted on those yellow nursery walls, collapsed under the weight of her uncertainty. She tried to keep talking, her voice tumbling into excuses. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I ended things when I found out I was pregnant. I thought maybe it could still be yours." But none of it mattered. The damage was done. The life I'd been imagining for months was gone, replaced by doubt so deep it poisoned everything. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing she had just admitted the one truth I could never forgive. The baby might not even be mine. And with that, our marriage was already over. After that night, the house turned into a battlefield without noise. No slammed doors, no broken plates, just silence sharp enough to cut skin. Ashley and I moved like strangers passing in a hallway, our words clipped down to bare necessities. Mail's on the counter. Dinner's in the fridge. Nothing more. I carried my clothes and a stack of paperwork into the living room, leaving the master bedroom behind. The couch became my bed, the hum of the ceiling fan my only company. Her perfume still lingered in the sheets down the hall, but I refused to touch them. At night, I'd hear her pacing, drawers opening, soft sobs muffled into pillows. I didn't ask. She didn't explain. The house was filled with reminders of the life we'd planned. The crib in the nursery, baby clothes folded neatly, yellow walls glowing like false promises. We were still under the same roof, but the warmth was gone. What remained was a cold war I knew couldn't last. When the call came that Ashley was in labor, I didn't hesitate. Whatever had happened between us, I couldn't ignore the moment. I drove to Memorial Herman Katie Hospital, the same place where we'd taken prenatal classes, the halls now colder, harsher under fluorescent light. The delivery room was crowded, nurses moving quickly, monitors beeping, voices urgent. I didn't rush to her side. I stayed against the far wall, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, watching from a distance. She barely looked at me, her focus locked on the pain, the doctors, the push of bringing life into the world. Hours later, the room filled with the sharp cry of a newborn. A nurse handed the baby to Ashley first, then eventually turned toward me. I held my daughter, small, perfect, innocent, and my chest tightened. But as I stared at her face, I knew. Even before the tests, even before the paperwork, the truth was written in her eyes. The nurse placed her gently in my arms, wrapped tight in a pink blanket. She was tiny, warm, her little chest rising and falling against me. For a moment, the room disappeared. It was just me and this new life. Her eyes fluttered, her lips puckered, and I felt a surge of something I couldn't name. But then the truth cut through. Her skin was darker than mine, darker than Ashley's. Her hair, thick with soft curls, nothing like ours. I searched her face desperately for something familiar, a chin, a nose, a trace of my blood. There was nothing. I'd told myself for months that genetics could surprise us, that maybe a distant relative's features might explain it. But standing there, holding her, I knew. She was innocent, untouched by the lies that had built her arrival. Yet in her tiny face was the final proof that the life I'd been clinging to was already gone. 2 days later, I returned to Memorial Hermann County Hospital, alone. I told the nurse I wanted a paternity test. She didn't flinch, just handed me a form and a swab. A quick rub inside my cheek, another for the baby, and it was over. Minutes of procedure, but it felt like the longest moment of my life. The results came back in a plain envelope, black letters on white paper. No drama, no comfort, just numbers. Probability of paternity. No explanation, no wiggle room, just science, blunt and final. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot, the paper shaking in my hands. I'd told myself I already knew, that I was prepared for this moment. But staring at those 3 digits, I felt the world tilt again. It wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the death of the future I thought I was holding in my arms. Once the DNA results sank in, there was nothing left to debate. I called my attorney the next morning. We sat in a quiet office in downtown Katy, blinds half closed against the sun, the air thick with the smell of old paper and coffee. I slid the envelope across the desk, the bold 0% glaring from the page. He didn't need to read the details. He'd seen this before. "We'll file immediately," he said. Within days, the petition for divorce was in motion. In Texas, proof of infidelity can speed the process, and between the receipts, the hotel charges, and the DNA test, my case was airtight. Ashley was served before the week was over. No screaming matches, no bargaining, just paperwork, signatures, and silence. We still lived under the same roof, but every glance, every step in the hallway was weighed down with finality. I wasn't her husband anymore, just a man waiting for the court to make it official. When the court date finally came, it was almost cruel in its brevity. We sat on opposite sides of the small courtroom in Katy, not looking at each other. The judge skimmed through the paperwork, his voice steady, detached, as if he were reading a grocery list. Proof of infidelity, DNA results, division of assets. "With these terms, the marriage is dissolved," he said, signing his name with a single stroke. And that was it. Years of love, a wedding under string lights, a nursery painted yellow, reduced to less than 20 minutes of legal process. The house went to Ashley. I didn't fight for it. I couldn't stomach walking through those rooms again, every corner soaked in memories of what had been promised and then broken. I packed my truck that same evening. No tears, no long goodbyes, just boxes, silence, and the final turn of a key left on the counter. I drove away knowing I wasn't leaving a home. I was leaving a grave. Moving day came with no ceremony, no goodbyes. A couple of friends helped me load boxes into a rented truck, their small talk filling the silence I couldn't break. By evening, everything I owned fit into a one-bedroom apartment across town. Blank walls, a single lamp, and no ghosts of promises gone bad. I ordered a pizza, set the box on the floor, and sat cross-legged beside it. No table, no couch, just cardboard and the hum of traffic drifting through the open window. For the first time in months, the air felt breathable. I took a bite, leaned back against the wall, and let the quiet wash over me. It wasn't joy, not yet. The hurt was still there, raw and heavy, but it was mine to carry, not tangled up with her lies. The apartment was bare, but it was clean. Empty, but it was mine. And that night, with a pizza box as my table, I felt the first faint stirrings of relief. A week after the move, I sat in a quiet office across from a woman with kind eyes and a yellow legal pad. My first therapy session. I'd never done anything like it before, but I knew I couldn't carry this wreckage alone. At first, the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain the sound of elevator doors closing on your marriage? The feel of a newborn in your arms who isn't yours? But little by little it came out. The betrayal, the anger, the shame I hadn't dared admit to anyone. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes jotting notes, asking questions that cut deeper than I expected. By the end of that hour, I felt raw, stripped open, but lighter too. For the first time, I wasn't just replaying the pain in my own head. I was putting it somewhere else, giving it shape, so maybe one day it wouldn't own me anymore. Outside the therapist's office, I threw myself into work. Offshore schedules, project deadlines, safety audits, things I could control. On the rig deck or at the Houston office, there were no lies, no shadows, just numbers, steel, and blueprints. I found comfort in the certainty of lines on paper. A load-bearing beam doesn't lie. A bridge either stands or it doesn't. The math is clear, the structure honest. Every drawing I unrolled across my desk reminded me that some things in life still followed rules, still held steady. Long days blurred into nights, but I welcomed it. Exhaustion was easier than silence. Focused on drilling schedules and pipeline designs, I could forget, for a little while, about hotel receipts and DNA tests. Coworkers called me reliable, unshakable. They didn't see the fracture beneath. But in every plan I stamped, every problem I solved, I felt a piece of myself reassembling, brick by brick, beam by beam. Work became my scaffolding, holding me upright while I learned how to stand again. After weeks of burying myself in work, I finally answered a text from Tom Alvarez, an old buddy who'd been calling since the divorce papers were filed. We met at the rusty Spur Sports Bar in Katy, the same place we used to crowd into after long shifts. Walking through the door, I expected awkward stares or pity. Instead, Tom slapped me on the back, grinning like no time had passed. Soon, a few more familiar faces joined, and before long, pitchers of beer and baskets of wings covered the table. We swapped stories, laughed about old jobs gone wrong, teased each other the way only longtime friends can. For a few hours, the weight on my chest loosened. I wasn't the man betrayed or the husband abandoned. I was just Ryan again, friend, coworker, brother in arms. The laughter didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I wasn't alone. There were still people who knew me before the wreckage, and they hadn't gone anywhere. One Saturday, I dusted off my old hiking boots and drove west, leaving Katie's sprawl behind for the sharp rise of the Texas hill country. The trail wound upward through scrub oak and limestone, the air cooler, cleaner with every step. At first my legs burned, my lungs protested, but the rhythm took over, step after step, breath after breath, until the noise in my head started to fade. The higher I climbed, the lighter I felt, like I was shedding months of heaviness with every mile. When I finally reached the summit, the wind hit my face strong and clean, carrying nothing but the smell of cedar and stone. I stood there alone, the whole horizon stretched out in every direction. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel trapped. Up there, with the world wide open, I could breathe again. Not as someone's husband, not as someone's mistake, just as myself. Not long after that hike, I pulled my old easel out of the closet, its wood still stained with colors from years ago. I hadn't touched it since before I met Ashley. Back then, life had filled up with work, bills, responsibilities. The brushes gathered dust while my heart grew heavier. One evening, I sat up in the corner of my apartment, cracked open a fresh set of paints, and let instinct take over. I didn't plan landscapes or portraits, I just let color spill. Streaks of red for the anger I couldn't say out loud, blues for the ache that lingered, grays for the nights I'd spent in silence. The canvas wasn't pretty, but it was honest. And as I layered brushstroke over brushstroke, I felt something loosen. Painting didn't erase what had happened, but it gave the pain a place to live outside my chest. Piece by piece, color by color, I was finding myself again. About a year after the divorce, when the raw edges had begun to dull, I met Claire Harper through mutual friends. She wasn't flashy, not the type to dominate a room. Instead, she carried herself with quiet steadiness, the kind of presence that made you feel you could finally put your guard down. We started small, coffee at a quiet cafe, walks through downtown Katy, evenings spent talking about everything from books to the best barbecue in Texas. From the beginning, I told her the truth about my past, about betrayal and the scars it left. I braced for pity or awkward silence. Instead, she just nodded and said softly, "Thanks for trusting me with that." No judgment, no rush, just honesty. Being with Claire didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me pain didn't have to define me. For the first time in years, I felt safe letting someone close again. And that safety felt like the first real step toward love. One evening, as we sat on a bench outside the Katy Public Library, I finally let the words spill. Not the surface-level version I gave coworkers or casual friends, but the raw truth. How I'd followed Ashley to that hotel, how the DNA test came back with a cold 0%, how the walls of my own home had turned into a battlefield of silence. I braced myself for the wince, the judgment, the well-meaning advice. But Claire didn't give me any of that. She just listened. Her eyes stayed steady on mine, her hands folded gently in her lap, the kind of presence that said, "I'm here. Keep going." When I finally ran out of words, the silence between us didn't feel heavy. It felt safe. She reached over, rested her hand on mine, and said softly, "You went through hell, but you're still here. That says more about you than what she did." For the first time, I believed it. With Claire, nothing was rushed. We moved at a pace that felt almost foreign after years of chaos. Simple things became lessons in trust, sharing a meal without suspicion, silences that weren't hostile but comfortable, laughter that came easily instead of forced. At first, I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for a lie to slip through her smile. But it never did. She was steady, present, never giving me reason to doubt. Each day, each conversation, chipped away at the armor I'd built around myself. One evening, while we cooked together in her small kitchen, she looked at me and said, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved, Ryan. You just have to be honest." Those words sank deeper than I expected. Honesty, something so simple, but something I'd been starved of. And with her, I found myself daring little by little to believe in it again, to believe in us. Months later, word about Ashley drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances. They said things hadn't gone well. The man she left me for was long gone. Money was tight, her job slipping, her parents worn down from helping her pick up the pieces. I sat there listening, letting the details sink in. Once, that kind of news might have stirred anger, or a bitter satisfaction that karma had finally found her. But instead, I just felt a quiet sadness. Not for us. We were long gone, but for the girl I once met at a community center with paint on her sweatshirt and a smile that felt like sunlight. I didn't want her back. I didn't wish her pain. I only knew that her life was no longer tangled with mine, and that was enough. Her struggle wasn't my justice. My freedom was, and I wasn't about to waste it looking backward. One evening I sat on the balcony of my apartment, the lights of Katy stretching out beneath me, and it hit me. I wasn't tethered anymore. The lies, the receipts, the courtroom, they weren't my story now. They were just a chapter I'd closed. I had a new rhythm, work that grounded me, friends who reminded me who I was, hikes that cleared my lungs, canvases that spoke when words failed. And then there was Claire, steady, kind, reminding me that love could exist without betrayal. For so long I'd felt chained to the wreckage of my marriage, like every step forward dragged a weight behind it. But sitting there, I realized the weight was gone. I wasn't her husband, I wasn't her victim. I was just Ryan Walker, Engineer, friend, man rebuilding piece by piece. And for the first time in years, the future didn't scare me. It felt wide open. Looking back, I used to believe betrayal had destroyed me. That the night I stood in the hotel lobby, watching elevator doors close on my marriage, was the end of everything. But it wasn't. It was the end of a chapter, not the book. In the months since, I've rebuilt piece by piece. Therapy cracked open the silence. Work steadied my hands. Friends reminded me of who I was before the lies. Hiking gave me back my breath. Painting gave me back my voice. And Claire showed me love can be honest, patient, and real. The scars remain, yes, but scars don't define you. They mark where you've been, not where you're going. I used to think Ashley's choices had written the final page for me. Now I know better. The pen was always in my hand. Betrayal may steal a chapter, but it doesn't get to write the ending. I am the author, and I choose to begin again.